This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and Ewen McKenzie. Tight times down where you are on the Victorian coast. Bushfires not far from where you are.
Yeah, hot times down here. 42 predicted today. Not a lot of wind, which is the key. But yeah, we've got bushfires 30 odd kilometres away. So, we'll see what happens. But everyone's on watch and act. So, and basically on evacuation warnings at the moment have been for the last 24 hours. So, if we get through today, we'll be a bit better off. But yeah, that's life in Victoria in summer. In fact, February is usually worse. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough summer at this rate.
Well, let's hope the temperature does not reach those extreme levels, and certainly let's hope that the wind stays away, and all the best. And
well, ironically, it's cold at the moment. It's 14 degrees, so I'm hoping their forecast is wrong there.
Yeah, very good. Now, Eddie Jones is actually in Australia on a reconnaissance mission ahead of the 2027 Rugby World Cup, and he is today in Townsville. And we also have a very special guest who is, I can see on the screen, trying to make his way on to the screen and into the program. So I'll wait and hold that as a big reveal, because I'm certainly looking forward to our special guest joining us, a great of the game, and someone, Ewen McKenzie, who you have great history with, and a man who you have achieved an enormous amount with over the years. So looking forward to him joining us as well, but we'll stay with that. But listen, I suppose for me, there is just so much news in rugby at the moment. Everywhere you look, there are stories, but probably for me, the big story at the moment is it was published in Midi Olympique, the French newspaper this week. They got the scoop that there is going to be discussions during the Six Nations between SANZAAR and the Six Nations, but also the major domestic competitions. A conversation led by Gus Pichot in his role as one of the leaders at World Rugby, to finally, let's hope, fingers crossed, nail the global season. Interestingly, representatives from the domestic competitions are involved. Now, it was reported in Midi Olympique, but it has been confirmed by the South African Rugby Union CEO, Riaan Oberholzer, that these conversations will take place. For you, how important is it that rugby achieves a global season?
Well, I think it's critical now because, I mean, effectively the calendar's getting filled up anyway, and so, but it's haphazard in terms of where players are, and ultimately you've got to work backwards and make sure that the players are looked after. I'm not talking about financially, but health-wise. We've got to make sure that they can actually play, and there's duty of care there. But also, I think from a promotional media perspective, we've got to be able to focus on the right things at the right time. And I find personally, I read the news as much as I can. I'm not involved directly in the game, so therefore I'm like many people, and you read, and it depends on where you read. But there's so much going on that you don't really know where to look and what's important. And so I think a global season would help align the focuses that way, so that we can focus on the right things at the right time, and we can actually get a concerted effort and channel the funding and the focus in the right part of the world at the right time. At the moment, it's everywhere. You don't know where to look. It's just there's a lot going on, which is great from a participation perspective, and great but it's not ideal. I like to know what's going on, but I don't know what's important. That's the reality. You don't know where to look to see what's the most important thing at the time. So some alignment in that area would be great, so you can get all of the eyes of the world watching the same place at the same time. That'll then help you drive your commercial, the commercial revenues and things like that as well. and that'll help everyone.
Yeah. Look, I think it's absolutely essential, and I don't think that we can leave these conversations without a result, because the game continues to struggle financially. And the competition is only going to get more from particularly the big North American sports, whether, the NBA are about to launch NBA Europe, which will be another massive competition. The NFL are increasingly looking to get out of North America. Baseball looking to get out of North America. More competition coming from football. So if rugby does not get its house in order, we are at great risk. So we do have Eddie Jones joining us on the move. Eddie Jones, your views on a global season?
Well, just endorsing what Ewan's saying, I think it's imperative that we get one, but it's been a discussion for a long period of time, and it's how the major competitions in the world can align. I think we need to have international windows. I think the most important thing about a global season is to have international windows where club rugby is not competing with the international game. I think that's probably, to me, the number one thing. How many test matches can a country play? Well, they probably need to play between 12 and 15. So that takes you up to 20 weeks, 8 weeks of rest and recovery. They give you a domestic season of 24 weeks. So then does that work? Does that work for the domestic competitions that have 24 weeks? And that's the challenge ahead. That's the reality of the challenge ahead.
Very good. Well, listen, we will return to this conversation about the international season, but we are joined by a great friend, one of the true greats of the game. I was talking to him the other day on the phone just about something else, and I said to him, well, why don't you come and jump on the program? And welcome to Rugby Unity, George Gregan.
Hey, Pemby. Hey, Linky. Hey, Beef. How are you?
Hey, Greg. How are you, mate?
How are you, mate? Good to see you.
How are you, guys?
So you and McKenzie, I was going to play a bit of a game, and you were going to have to guess who was going to be there. And we were talking just before coming on air, and you didn't get the answer that I was looking for. But when you think about George Gregan, tell us your story of your engagement with George Gregan going back over the years. When did you first come across George and start to involve with him?
Back in the formative days of the Brumbies, we're all there. We're all there like on a magical mystery tour of Super Rugby back then, and with Rod McQueen, and we were sort of like trying to work out how things are going to work down there. So it's in that space from a playing perspective, and then obviously drifted into coaching. I didn't have as much to do with things. I was involved with the forwards, and in those days it was a slightly different game. So the halfback was really involved with what the forwards were doing. So it was more with Eddie, but we sat in a lot of strategy meetings, a lot of game meetings, and a lot of tactical discussions over the years, and we had good times off the field too. So it's been a while. He's ageless. I'm looking here going, he looks the same as he did. man, hey, I'm feeling old. He looks exactly the same as he did then. So he's doing well.
Good genes, Link.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. Every time we run into each other, you look at him and he's looking as he does today. But George Gregan, what about you and McKenzie? Thinking back about your relationship with Ewen over the years, when did you first come into his orbit, or when did you first observe him?
Yeah,
the way he was contributing to the game.
Well, for me, Pemby, it was definitely 94. It was before the Brums, so we obviously linked up. Literally with the Wallabies. Yeah. So we went to. I think it was my first 4 Test matches in '94 was with Link, and it was an amazing Wallaby team. And we went to a World Cup in '95. It didn't quite go the plan we wanted. We got knocked out in the quarter final, and then Super Rugby emerged. And as Ewan, just repeating what he said, it was a bit of a startup, mix and match, a bit of a Lego. What are we going to do? What are we going to create? With some wonderful players, well led by Ron McQueen and the people that he assembled. I heard you earlier, Linky, about getting yourself ready for the evacuation. Hopefully the weather doesn't get to those high 40s. But it reminded me of Quinzo with his task. He always had a checklist of what had to be done. So we had a really special group of people on and off the field and had a lot of fun off the field as well. But we achieved a lot in a short period of time. And like Linky mentions, he then went from playing into coaching. One of the first things I remember with Link in 2000 was us talking about what we're going to do with the Wallaby squad in the sauna. Where was it? It was up in Coolum, just getting in preparation for what was the next probably 12-week block we're doing with the Wallabies. So, no, we've done a lot of stuff, as you said, strategically, playing together, but also off the field, enjoying some good memories with our families. You know, what was that, Melrose Place? The way to get to Linky's
That's right, yeah, that's right, yeah.
The way to get to Linky's hut. BP pie, but more importantly...
Yeah. That's
the
right.
most important thing was making sure you had your licorice all sorts. So that was like the...
Wow, that was my undoing. Paying the price now, don't worry. Paying the price now. Yeah.
So fond memories with Linky, and it continues. Like we haven't seen each other in a long time, but it's like we caught up yesterday.
That's right.
And Eddie Jones, George Gregan has come along to join us today, and your memories of George. When did you first come into George's orbit?
Player power, mate. We talk about player power, like it's something that's always been in the game. Sorry, I'm in the main street in Townsville chasing internet. But yeah, the first time was George at the Sydney Airport. I remember Mark Singlery, George, Case, I think, maybe Stevie Larkin, David Giffen. Flew in from Tokyo on the recommendation of Ewen, and got interviewed by George and a group of players. And I was thinking, what's going on here? And ended up getting the job, and lucky enough to keep coaching after that. But George was the heart and soul of the Brumbies. Took over from. I had Robbo as the captain for the first year, then George took over the captain, and I can always remember the speech he gave before the 2001 final. I don't think anyone in the room believed anything else but it was going to be a win for the Brumbies, and he spoke brilliantly and obviously had a great career for the Brumbies and the Wallabies. And for Suntory, played brilliantly for Suntory. He was the most expensive rugby finisher in the game at that stage.
Very funny, D. Very funny. Good times. Those before the word finisher came in, isn't it?
Exactly, mate. Exactly.
That's right.
And so, George, your memories of that interview back all those years ago when Eddie Jones turned up, because I do remember at the time speaking to you and McKenzie, and he did say, when I asked, I caught up with one of the cappuccino sets, which was you blokes all sitting around having a coffee. And when Rod was leaving, I went to Ewen and said, so who is it? And he said, it's going to be Eddie Jones. And I was like, Eddie Jones? Is that guy from Randwick, and where's he coaching? But what was your view? Well, through that interview, did you see what's gone on to be Eddie Jones to coach? Did you see it from those early days?
I think totally. I think from a perspective of like young, like and hungry, like we all were. Like I think Linky spoke about what the Brumbies was at that initial stage. It was a real startup, and you needed a certain energy and fail fast, learn quickly. I think that was definitely something we did very, very well at the Brumbies, because we were written off. So what are you doing in this competition? So there was always that attitude of like, we belong, and we need someone to help us drive that sort of mentality and that mindset. And yeah, think player power, it was everyone. Everyone was involved. I have to give Rob McQueen a big pat on the back for that. It was an ensemble piece. Like we're all in it together, and we felt that. Like we really felt part of it. So the person who's going to take over after Rod went into the Wallaby position was someone who shared the same values and the same drive. And Eddie had that in spades and was just keen to learn. Because, rugby at that stage was only 2 years professional. So you needed to have that sort of mindset and that sort of attitude to learn and grow. And Eddie's, as we know, Eddie's driven, prepared, super focused. and good fun too. I think that was it. Like, knew when to switch on and inspire that sort of enjoyment of the game. We're playing professional rugby. We could be in normal jobs, or we can be playing professional rugby. What do you want to do?
Where the real battle in those days, Pemby, like you might remember, obviously New South Wales and Queensland didn't want to give us anything, so we were literally trying to steal players. You know, they said you can only have so many, and we said stuff you, and guys like, you know, Giffen and these sort of guys turned up. But I was running around Sydney. I was in the squad, obviously, but I was running around Sydney. I was going to Classic Sportswear and getting to make training jerseys from leftover material from the North Sydney Bears and the Cowboys. And so we had these. I was designing these training jerseys. So we had one with looked like a cow, so to keep keep Cameron Milk happy. So it was all on shoestring stuff. So as a player, I was up there doing that just so we could look a bit different and look like a team. And I remember hitting up my brother-in-law, and we're getting literally getting a person to pay for each item of clothing. That's where it was. And Rod was on the big picture stuff, you know, like what are we going to call the team? And that was another. But the tin tacks are trying to be, you know, I happily went to the Brumbies because I was looking for the experience. And New South Wales, they offered me more to stay, but I wasn't interested. I was interested for the experience, and it turned out to be a fantastic. But everyone was in it together. It was a really, and I know everyone says that, but it truly was that. And it was all these little things that came together. And then in the end, we had a great team. We had some of the best thinkers in the game. They were all there in Canberra. You know, when you get the Kafers and the, you know, and Robbo and Giffen and Griggs and Stevie Larkham, and we had the best thinkers in the game. They're all there. So, you know, that's where I thought Eddie would be fantastic to be able to take over and be able to turn it into something better. Because at that point in time, you know, we'd been competitive, but we hadn't won anything, you know. So,
yeah. Happy times.
Can be just one other thing. Actually, you'd like this, guys. I'm obviously living in Collingwood now when I'm back in home in Melbourne. And I ran into Stewie Rex Livingston just at our local coffee shop. And he's still fidget chest. His posture's good. Best set of teeth in Melbourne. And more importantly, I remember him trying to find... No, he's eased up on that. But I'll tell you what, his memory of trying to find a training facility. We were at RMC, everything what you were saying, Linky, just scratching around, just calling on favours from the Canberra community because we didn't have a home base. And so that's not everyone's cup of tea. And that's where Eddie came in and added that sort of next layer of, okay, here's how we do it. Let's be professional. Let's learn from the best. But you can elaborate more on that, B. But I think it was an inspired meeting, and the timing was perfect for where we were as a rugby club.
Yeah, I can remember going on what George was saying. I remember the first strength and conditioning session out at Tuggeranong we were doing with the Year 7 class. And I'm thinking, this is supposed to be one of the best things in Super Rugby. We're doing strength and conditioning with the Year 7 PE class out at Tuggeranong. So, you know, there was a few things to be done, and you know, the efforts of everyone to get that done was remarkable in a short period of time.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we could talk all night, as they say, boys, and at some stage we will, but we do have to get on to the work of helping to secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. And George Gregan brings not only that great experience and as a player, as an advisor in the game, but he's now living half between Australia and half in the UK as well. So he can bring a different view to our conversation today, and look forward to him joining us throughout that conversation. But George, we just before you joined, we were talking about the importance of the global season. You're still very heavily involved in the game as the chair of the Global Rugby Players Foundation, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you're also a television commentator as well. What's your views about the importance of this global calendar?
I think it's really important. I heard some of the comments from Eddie and Ewen as well in relation to it's probably a long overdue, and the way the game's evolving. you don't want to get caught in the trap of like more's better of international rugby. There's got to be a cap on how many tests you can play physically. I think it's really important that the players get a chance to regenerate and improve over a period of time, which might be that 6 to 8 week block. And then you have some meaningful competitions, which are held in from a provincial, in some way like Japan, it's company based, but they're meaningful competitions, which then that feeds the system too of international rugby players, and you get to see them at some point during that period. I think it's really critical, and that's for both the men's and women's game. And then you formulate what they've got now, which is separate to 15s, but this fits into the calendar, which is the 7s as well. I think it's really important that the competitions and the time that's set aside for them throughout the global season are really meaningful towards the fans, because ultimately the game's about being supported by your fan base. And if they're not silly, and they'll understand if something's not meaningful. And I think that's really, really important. And you want to see the best players when you can as well, but you also want your best players performing at their best. So they need some time to prepare, regenerate, and go again.
Do you feel at the moment that there is a sense of goodwill in the game at the moment, and there is an understanding that because of where the game is, and particularly financially, we talk about this a lot on the program, that the game is broke. Let's be clear. You know, like we are struggling to generate sufficient revenues to invest in the game. Do you feel that this is the time, this is the moment, and there is that goodwill that the stakeholders will understand that they do have to, you know, there does have to be give and take for the game to be able to land on a global calendar?
I think so, and I think you can learn from other sports. Like cricket's a good example. Like IPL's many years, it's coming up to probably 25 years or nearly 30, maybe 25 years old. And that was something which it's going to ruin Test cricket. It's going to ruin this, but it's actually provided another form of entertainment and a different style of cricket, which the fans love. And it's a different, I think, genre / I guess, fan base that you're getting, which isn't the traditional cricketer. But I was at the MCG. It was only 2 days, the Test match, unfortunately. But that's still got 95,000. So it's actually made that meaningful Test cricket really important for the fan. So I think what you can learn from other sports with that sort of idea is that let's think a bit differently. What do the fans want? What can we create which actually helps promote the game? It also helps promote young players, creates another little pathway too, I think is important, which is not the traditional way we've done for the last 30 odd years, as well as I keep coming back to it, and I'm really strong on this. The competition, whatever you create, they have to be meaningful for the fan. They've got to buy into it. If they don't, it's going to be a way of wasting a lot of money and people's time.
And I think on that point there, Pemby, going back to what Eddie said about, you know, that obviously having a test window, we've got to make sure the test window is meaningful as well. I mean, if you look at some of the July tests, like France, for instance, quite often sends out, you know, France B, France C on tour to New Zealand or whatever. And so if you get that inequitable situation, so that's not as interesting for the fans if you're watching, you know, the B team playing against the A team of another country. So we've got to start and make sure that the test windows, that, you know, the people that those test windows are actually appropriate where the best players are playing, and then work backwards through the other competitions to make sure that they dovetail into that as well. So I think the Nations Cup this year will show a bit, because that competition runs across a period of time. So we'll probably see a different approach from countries about how they deal with those tests, particularly the ones earlier in the middle of the year. So we might see a shift there in terms of the way it's made, but no good if you're just playing, you know, if you're playing you're trying to get test matches under your belt in June, July, and you're playing against the B team or the C team from another country who are sending out development players. So we've got to start and make sure the test matches are genuine test matches, and then go from there.
Well, I certainly think with the Nations Championship this year, that should start to solve some of that problem, although there is also reporting out of France at the moment that the LNR won't be releasing players. But I think there's going to be a lot more pressure, given that the Nations Championship is going to be a genuine competition. And stakeholders like the French government, for example, are going to be very interested in having a competitive French team who are challenging for that particular title, because international rugby teams aren't just rugby teams. They're sort of geopolitical strategic assets. And we saw that in France at the Olympics last year. It was a wonderful demonstration of everything that was good and great about the French people and the French economy. And they took great pride and delight, particularly out of the French Sevens team. So I would expect that there'll be enormous pressure on the LNR to release players. But certainly once we do get that international season right, that should, again, lead to greater opportunity and less pressure on those players and less pressure on those clubs, so as that they are going to get their best players at the best time when they're being competitive. And Eddie Jones, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but I did see that they were talking about representatives of the URC, Super Rugby, the Premiership, Top 14, joining with Gus Pichot and the others about this. But I just wonder whether or not the Japanese league are being considered in this as well. Do you know if they're being included in these conversations?
There's a group called the Global Alliance, mate, that meet. I think they were meeting last night. I wasn't able to attend because I was in transit, but they were having a chat about these issues. But, all the stuff that's being said is right, but the big challenge is, we've got Six Nations at a certain time, and people plan 20 years ahead to go to those Six Nations games. And the desire to change the dates of those games is not great in the Northern Hemisphere, right? So that immediately gives us 3 windows of Test rugby, the Six Nations, July, November, which is too much. So, the challenge is, how can you get the Six Nations and whatever the Southern Hemisphere Championship takes form of, it seems to be morphing again into the great rivalry between South Africa and New Zealand at the moment. How do you get it down to 2 test windows? Because that's the crucial point. We can talk about all these other lovely things, but unless you can get that where you can get the Six Nations in line or bring the rest of the world in line with the Six Nations, which at the moment is probably the financial powerhouse of world rugby.
With that in mind, it's that thinking differently, isn't it? Could you start, here's a question, B and Linky, could you start, you think, in the Southern Hemisphere in this time of year, because it's going to be February, March, could you have internationals play during that period, which sort of goes against summer sport, but is it physically an option, or is it more of a change of mindset in terms of when we play those games?
Well, I think George, if I just throw 2 bobs in there, that's a possibility, but it just takes a mindset. Like, you go to New Zealand and rugby's a winter sport there, so someone's going to have to give something.
I think the venues are available now. I think the teams are already training now. So if they're able to train now, they can play now. So I think, we'll start working backwards and saying, well, what's an impediment? The impediment is the mindset. And I agree with what Eddie says about we're not great at watching sports outside of the traditional windows. But, soccer in Australia took the summer window because it was free, because the winter sports were entrenched in the winter. So they took that and started playing, in the off-season, so-called off-season, the off-winter season. And so they took that opportunity and took the venues as well. So it's about the venue availability as much as anything else. So that might actually be, if you weren't playing in the same window as league, that might actually be beneficial for the rectangle fields. But then you come into competition with the soccer team. So, but this, I'm just looking at looking at what Eddie said. The anomaly is July. July is a window where it sits out on its own. If you look at the Six Nations and you look at the November series, they're closer together on the calendar, so you might be able to push them together in this part of the world. Maybe, I don't know. So maybe that's a possibility. You're more likely to be able to play across this period now because they're at training anyway. Yeah? I mean, that's how I think about it. They're already out in the training field. Yeah, it's hot, but it's possible.
Yeah, apparently, according to the reporting, it was, New Zealand has been resistant because of, the desire to protect Super Rugby. But who knows? I would imagine that change is probably coming. And if it can happen, certainly I think having the leadership of someone like Gus Pichot leading those conversations, let's hope that we can make some progress there. And let's see if there's some reporting that comes out of those just to see whether or not that is going to take place. Because some other very big news last week, again, was the announcement that South Africa and New Zealand will play the fourth of the greatest rivalry test matches in Baltimore in the United States of America.
We're not talking rugby, we're building it. Rugby Unity.
George Gregan, your views, first of all, on the greatest rivalry and the fact that we have had to sit down the Rugby Championship this year and it won't be taking place because of the greatest rivalry. Your views on that, because I understand that you've had something to say about that, but also then your views about taking the games to the United States of America as part of World Rugby's plan and preparation for the 2031 Rugby World Cup.
Well, I think that the last part, it makes sense going to Baltimore to play in a new market, a new country, which, as you said, 2031, it's good forward planning. Two iconic world-leading rugby nations playing in America. They're probably, we've seen the success of Ireland playing against New Zealand. They always play that at Soldier Field in Chicago, where there's a few Irish people, a few Irish fans, and the Kiwis like to travel as well. And that's been a huge success and continues. So I can see why they've done that for the fourth test. And it's an education. There's obviously a commercial piece to it, which will be strong for both countries. But in terms of the greatest rivalry, I think they could have, and I'm just going back on what's happened in the past. We used to play the Mandela Cup many, many years ago. They still play it, but you might put an extra test on, but it didn't interfere with, at that stage, it was the Tri-Nations. It was an add-on. But the Tri-Nations was still a really important competition. It'd be like saying the Six Nations, the greatest rivalry is between England and France, and then they're going to pause Six Nations. I know there's a lot more history to Six Nations, but to me, that's the equivalent. So I think that could have been done concurrently, because you just saw how important and how you talk about a meaningful competition. The Rugby Championship last year went down to the last weekend of matches, and there was probably 3 or 4 teams, well, definitely 3 teams, but if things went their way, Argentina may have been able to get through, but I think they were the only one who weren't probably going to be able to lift the trophy. And that's what you want, I think, in a strong competition. So it's hit its high water mark, and then they're just going to pause for a year for this greatest rivalry. That's what I've said this publicly before. I could understand why both countries have done it. There's remuneration, there's good commerce behind it, but I think for the fabric of, particularly the game here in the Southern Hemisphere, it was a bit disappointing. I think you could have had it done concurrently. Just add on there's 2 more test matches that they would have had to add on from the Rugby Championship, and you find a way to do that. That was my take on it.
Ewen McKenzie, your views?
Yeah, I see and agree with what George is saying. I think it's been opportunistic, and basically everyone's had to move around to be able to accommodate, which is disappointing. I think we started to see the Rugby Championship bear fruit. To be honest, the Six Nations was the 5 nations, if you remember. Italy came in. Italy didn't win a game for a long time. Now they're suddenly competitive. It takes time to build these competitions. So yeah, they've got a brand, and as I agree with Eddie, it's a brand that's in place for the next 20 years, whatever. But I agree. I think that it would have been better had they adapted and tried to add the extra test matches and maybe a mini tour to get those 2 test matches. They could have done that within their own competitions, as opposed to punishing everyone else. I don't see I see as a negative step putting the championship on hold. I just don't see that, just really saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We're going to do something else anyway. That's basically what you're saying. So everyone else has to then look after themselves in the meantime. So, anyway, it's a dash for cash, and that's what happens. Like, if everyone's struggling for $1, you've got to do things. So they're probably looking at the other way and saying they're being creative as well. So you can't blame them for that. But in terms of the competitions, we've lost a bit of meaning in that. So it's good that Gus is assembling the troops and trying to have this conversation again. He's a smart operator, Pichot. I coached him at Stoke-on-Say. He's a great guy and a very good operator, clearly, on the international stage. So hopefully he can advance that to an outcome rather than just more conversations.
And Baltimore, what's your views about that, taking the fourth game? There's criticism that rugby shouldn't be taking matches to the USA at the moment in protest to the actions of the US government at the moment. There are other people who are saying, why would you take it why don't keep it in the traditional markets? I think we
can stay out of the politics side of it. I think I was watching it's two sides to all of that. But I was watching the Patriots play the Broncos last night. It was like beautiful weather. They were playing in snow at the end of the game. It was unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. Anyway, so America has its own challenges, but they've got the stadiums. And they are going to try and promote the game prior to the World Cup. So logically, they're going to try and do these sort of things to try and showcase and get the game more on the tip of people's tongues and understand what the game's about. So I think there's a bigger strategy there in terms of underpinning the World Cup. But it sort of does get lost a little bit. The idea of having a tour in South Africa, I like the idea of touring. I think it's a good part of the sport. But then to suddenly disappear over there away from your fan base and play that one-off game seems a bit odd to me. But anyway, it's probably more to do with the World Cup than anything else.
Yeah. Eddie Jones, your thoughts, first of all, on the greatest rivalry and the pausing of the Rugby Championship, and then secondly, the decision to take the fourth Test match to Baltimore in the United States.
Well, I think maybe shows the influence of Silver Lake with the All Blacks, the need for them to generate more income. It's obviously all about income. South Africa's become this sort of loose agent in World Rugby. They're shifted around their domestic competition. They've gone out of Super Rugby into URC. Is their next step to step out of the Rugby Championship. But there was that talk about them wanting to be in the Six Nations to make that a Seven Nations. And, South Africa's got their own market, a different market from everyone else, and they're just trying to do their best. But it's a big trip from Brakpan to Baltimore. So I hope they're not playing, the Lions out of Brakpan. That could be a trip for the fans. But, the whole idea of having a tour in South Africa, 4 tests playing against the provinces, that's going to be fantastic for South African rugby, and it'll make great television. So as a product, I think it's fantastic. But obviously the Rugby Championship's been shifted, which is one of the reasons why I'm up in Townsville now looking at hotels from Japan, because we now get 2 tests against Australia because there's a gap for Australia. It's a shifting market, mate. And money is leading the drum, I think.
Yeah, indeed it is. I actually think I think Baltimore is a great choice as well. It's a very prosperous area. It's a large area. I think it's the 3rd largest area behind Los Angeles and New York. Very strong defence, cyber, technology area. It's obviously close to Washington, so there'll be all of the government and embassies and other people who'll be interested. They're trying to be, they're bidding to be a host city in 2031. And I think most interestingly, that rugby was first played in the United States in that northeast corner of the US back in 1874 when Harvard played McGill. And it's an interesting story and history about rugby and also the NFL and the emergence of NFL also, through the universities in that part of the world. But to see NFL and where it's grown, and rugby obviously has not grown, there's another story to that for another time. And there's, in fact, a very good podcast called Acquired. And if people are interested in that, you get the history of the NFL, and it tells a great story about exactly how the game emerged through the universities. So we'll put a link into the show notes. So highly recommend you listening to that particular podcast. But other news that's come through, the New Zealand Rugby Union have confirmed that there will be the process is underway, that it will be a New Zealand coach with international experience. So that sort of cuts the list down. But before we talk about that particular process, George Gregan, last week the conversation was all about player power. And we had a bit of a chat during the week about player power. What is player power? For people to understand, what is it? And how does it work inside a team? And how is it that the senior players in the All Blacks may have had such influence that they were able to change the coach?
Yeah, it's interesting. Player power, obviously, we spoke about at the beginning with Linky and Eddie with the Brumbies. Like, it's, to me, player power, it's the leadership piece of working really, really closely with your coaches and the organisation within the team that you're playing with to go forward together. And I think because you need to get buy-in from the players and vice versa. The coach, and these two have coached for many, many years. You want your players to get behind the coach as well and be playing for everything, playing for the coach, playing for the organisation, playing for each other. And are really good teams, and you hear it now across all sports. There's a leadership group. It's got like 2 or 3 vice captains. It's got all those things. It's actually crying out for players to take responsibility for how they prepare, how they play, how they actually review their performance, and how they work with the coaches to get better. And I think it's really, really important. Now, it sometimes gets portrayed as they've asked of the coach, they've done this. I think a lot of the times there'll be feedback, and that feedback is always, we've all been through it as players and coaches at 360. What do people think of you? And what's the actual, let's shake the honesty tree. And you take it on board. Sometimes you don't like what you hear, but it's coming from a place which is to make you better. And I think that's what my take on player power was. You need strong leaders within your team to work really closely with your coaches and the people within that organisation to help you go forward. And if there's something not quite there, then there's going to be an issue. And obviously, in the feedback and we don't know the background of whatever that assessment at the end of the year was, but someone like David Kirks looked at it and said, well, we need to make a change. And that's a real shame for Razor, because he's been a fantastic and super successful coach in New Zealand. He's coached outside. He went through the pathway to become the All Black coach, but I can't speak on behalf. I know as a player you sometimes don't get picked, and that makes you better for the next time you get an opportunity. Actually, that's the case with Razor, but that's my take. I hope that answers your question around player power, because to me it's just strong leadership and working really, really closely with the people that matter, and they are the coaching group and the people within the organisation.
Eddie Jones, what's your view about player power?
Well, I think rugby's a player's game. Players get on the field and they make all the decisions. The intervention of the coach is minor during a game. So you've always got to have strong players, particularly in rugby. It's not like basketball. I remember meeting, basketball and volleyball coaches in Japan before the last Olympics. And they were talking about how much they want the players to adapt and make decisions in the game. But you watch a game of volleyball and basketball, every time there's a problem, there's a timeout. The coach comes on with his whiteboard, scribbles out the solution for it. But we don't have that in rugby. The players have got to work that out. So you always want a strong group of players, and they've got to run the game, and they've got to have strong input into how how the environment is. And so I think it's always been part of rugby. I think particularly in the amateur era, it was probably even stronger. The professional era, I think it's gone through some ebbs and flows. I think at the start it was very strong. I think it probably went through a period where it dropped off a little bit. And I think now again, the importance of the players is coming through as the game gets even more chaotic and you have to adapt even more. One of the most important parts of rugby, mate.
And Ewen, for you, as someone who was a player and who was involved in player power at both the Wallabies and the Brumbies, but then also obviously as a coach, you have a great experience of working with players.
Yeah, I agree with what George and Eddie have said. I think for the people listening, it's important to understand that it's not a players versus coaches thing, and often it's presented that way in the media. In the ideal player power environment, the players are making them each other accountable as well. That's the bit that sometimes gets missed. And if you look at the All Blacks over the years, they've been very good at having that internal where the players drive high standards amongst each other. And I think where player power goes awry is when it becomes the players versus the establishment or the coaches or whatever it is. But you've got to make sure that everyone's looking around them and making sure that they're demanding the same levels and expectations of each other, not just looking up and down. And that's the same for the coaches. The coaches have got to be able to deliver, be consistent as well. So you can't have coaches telling you one thing and then doing something else. So there's a consistency around it. And so I think that player power is it's not about players versus coaches or players versus administration. It's about demanding high standards from everyone around, including themselves. And so sometimes that goes awry, but that's fundamentally what it's about. And it is accountability. But Eddie makes a really good point. The players have got to run the game on the field. There's no one else out there. The coach doesn't have the opportunity to get out there. All we can do is change players. That's about all you can do. In the end, the players have to own it. So why not spend your time as a coach during the week getting the players on board and understanding what the potential optimal way of playing this game is going to be, and giving them the tools and the knowledge and that behind it, and hopefully they'll embrace it. But in the end, they're still going to solve it on the weekend anyway. If it doesn't pan out like we think it might, they're going to solve the problems.
Yeah. Can I just add on that, Linky and Viva? This would have been teams we played. For example, I mean, you'd work so hard tactically, strategically, players, coaches for the match ahead. And just say, for example, I'm not going to talk for too long. It may have been saying we're going to beat them on the fold. We're just going to go same way, same way, same way. We kept doing that. And we said after 20 minutes, we might look at going back down the short side. But after 20 minutes, we're kind of thinking, well, why would we go down the short side when we just beat him on the same way? So we'll just go same way till half time. And then we might have a chat at half time and talk, or vice versa. You might change a bit quicker because they're overfolding. But those decisions have to be made on the field. And you're feeling it. The coaches might be able to see it, but there's some things which players are on the field, they can see and feel it. And then you have a discussion. And I remember plenty of times where I got messages from be it Linky or B saying, what do you think of that going back down the short side? We'd come back and say, mate, we've got him on the fold. We'll stay with it. And don't call that player power, or that's working together, being accountable for what's happening now and how do we get better, or let's continue because they're not responding. I think that's when it's at its best, because you've worked together, you're feeling it, and then you're on the field and you can make that adjustment. Everyone talks about that adjustment, situational football, or whatever it is, situational sport. That's when it's at its best.
That reminds me of a story of Rexy. So he used to run messages for the Brumbies. So he used to send him messages sometimes. And he'd come back and he said, Cave told me to F off. Cave was one who didn't like to get a lot of input from the coach during the game. And most of the time he was pretty right. How he saw the game. So, again, you look at that, it just shows you the importance of players, good players.
So, Eddie, are you surprised in the, let's call it the Silver Lake era, that, the New Zealand Rugby Union has decided that the All Black coach must be a New Zealander with international experience?
No, I think it's a really, really good, strong point. You know, All Black Rugby, they've been the best country in the world. They want to have a New Zealand coach in their national team. No, I think it's really good. I think it's fantastic. And it shows good leadership, I think.
Okay, George Gregan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, not much to add to that. And that actually inspires the next young or New Zealand coach who's overseas, understanding that they're going to be rewarded potentially with the best job in World Rugby as far as the New Zealand coach is concerned. That's coaching the All Blacks. So there's a desire to get better. There's a desire to get experience, and there's an understanding that if you do all those things, you might get rewarded with the best job in your country.
Yeah. Ewen McKenzie?
Yeah, the same. I'm not surprised. I think it's the right approach for them. So, you know, they're not going to go offshore. They'll look within. And so the only thing they've added is the international experience, which Robertson didn't have. I guess if you look back, he didn't have that. So now they've made that quite important distinction for the next guy in.
Can I just add to that? I reckon if you look at historically in New Zealand, yeah, their two of their most successful coaches have been Graham Henry and Steve Hansen. And what did they both have in common? They both had successful Super Rugby careers, but then both of them went to Wales. And Graham Henry he was the king of Wales for a while there, but ended up being run out of town at the end. And Steve Hansen had a difficult time there, lost, I think, 10 tests in a row, but ended up having a good World Cup with them. And both took that experience back to New Zealand to become great All Black coaches. And I think, you know, particularly now, how World Rugby is, Australia and New Zealand are relatively isolated from the rest of the rugby world. And I think not having that experience coaching internationally before you get the All Black coach is something they've probably picked up on. And therefore, I think that's, you know, again, a good bit of leadership by the New Zealand Rugby Union.
Who's it going to be, Eddie? Eddie, who's it going to be?
Look, I think when they made Jamie Joseph, New Zealand 15 coach last year, I think the writing was on the wall. They rated him. He's done a good job of resurrecting the Highlanders. You know, again, experienced a couple of tough seasons there. He's had international experience, did Japan for 8 years. I think maybe they'll do a team between him and Dave Rennie, who again's had experience coaching Australia. So that'll give you a fairly strong two coaches at the top of the tree.
So when you talk about international experience, Eddie Jones, and reflecting on your own career, obviously coaching assistant coach over in South Africa, coaching England, coaching Japan, what is it that international experience gives you that makes you a better coach? What precisely is it that New Zealand Rugby would be looking for as what is that benefit of that input?
I think two main things. Firstly, just from a knowledge point of view, like, you know, coming out of Australia, our whole thing was to run with the ball. Yeah, we played an attacking style of the game, but we know Test match rugby is a combination of kicking and running. And I think, you know, having had the experience with South Africa and England, you learn about how valuable the kicking game can be. And I think the second thing is that you have to learn to adapt. You know, you go into a different environment. Socially, it's different. The context is different. You learn to adapt. And I think those two skills as an international coach, having great knowledge of the game and being able to adapt to certain situations are really important going forward.
Very good. All right, we have other topics to talk about, gentlemen, but George, we have this segment on the program that we call the Third Voice, which is the voice of the fans. It's the voice of our community, and they do send in comments and questions, and I do have a number of those again today. But to go through those, Waywind on YouTube says, this channel is super underrated, a lot of quality insight from these three men. Rambo Ronnie on Reddit says, Rugby Unity with Eddie Jones and Ewen McKenzie is the best going around. Daniel Sandra in the survey, and just a reminder to people, the survey is still up and in the description for the show. So if you jump on and please fill that out, that helps us to learn a little bit more about you and what you want from our program. Love that Rugby Unity is independent and calls it as it is with passion and love. And I love that the audience has a voice. And Daniel Grossman from Facebook, please, please, please let Eddie coach New Zealand. As a Springboks supporter, this would be the worst news for South African rugby ever. Anyway, well, that's not going to happen. Anyway, just a couple of questions, and I'll start with you, Ewen McKenzie from T. O'Brien from the USA through the survey. What are your growth and development projects of rugby in America, particularly comparing the USA in the late 70s and early 80s to now? Too many think USA hosting the World Cup will help develop the game. The growth of the game in America is awful at best. What's your views, Ewen McKenzie, on the game in the USA at the moment?
I think there's been lots of efforts made over a period of time to try and grow the game, but they always seem to get stymied. They've obviously got a professional league, but it's problematic. I mean, the players that's been attracting has been more superannuation type setup, but I get the same feedback. The people I talk to in America, they say the same thing. They've got a lot of local interest. There's been a lot of clubs that have been there for a long time, supported locally. They haven't been able to get to the next level to be able to create sort of any national perspective on. They have a national high school team and a national college team. They have competitions to get you to a national title, but that still doesn't have it. There's no unifying effect, and maybe that's the way the teams are distributed around the country. So if you're working now from the World Cup backwards, the World Cup might give a focal point, but there's a lot of people that see the game, rugby, as being a social sport. It's tied in with drinking and having a good time. So and that's sort of been a traditional perspective of rugby, that it's a tough sport, but it's a social sport as well. And so there's an aspirational versus participation gulf there, I think. They've got to get more people into the aspirational side of it and find a meaningful way and get them to the top, because they're not consistently successful at the test level. Yet they've been at it for a long time. So I don't know the answer, but I don't know the answer.
Eddie Jones, you've taken your Japanese team there over the last couple of years for the Pacific Nations Cup. What's your views on rugby in the USA?
Well, if I was to give Robbo some advice and USA Rugby, there'd be one thing I'd do, mate. USA have been one of the top sides in women's soccer since the game became popular. And they've done that not on the back of a good domestic competition, but on what they call a residential program, where the national team trains together for long periods of time. They want America to be successful at the next World Cup. That's what they got to do. And then if America's successful at the next World Cup, and then the other programs will come up from that, because there'll be money in the game, there'll be interest in the game. But what they've just got to focus on is how can they make the national team successful? And, they're not going to do it on the back of an MLR where they've got 6 teams there. They're basically part-time teams. They're not allowed to have the players until 4 weeks before the start of the season. So that's not going to cut the mustard. So they've got to do something a little bit unconventional. So tell Robbo there'll be invoice for that advice.
My take, it's probably what Ewen was saying. I don't know the answer, but I do know the college system across a lot of sports. Some of those are amateur, and they're building their ultimate, or what the aspirational piece is, qualifying for the Olympics. And then what do they do after that? But from a rugby perspective, yes, there is an Olympic, but it's only for 7. So it's a certain type of player who can do that. But my question would be to the college system and the university system in America, could there be a level and an interest of creating a rugby competition for both men and women in those universities, and take it out of it? Yes, it's a social, fun sport where there's some drinking and it's hard and it's tough, but it's a bit more than that. I think that could help, because the college system is huge. Their sport, and they love their colleges, and even if they're professional players, they all go back to their college. There's there's a real meaningfulness and a camaraderie and a real strength of tribalism with university sport in America. So that'd be something I think would be worth exploring and seeing if the universities would be prepared to introduce rugby, knowing full well that from an aspirational piece, it's World Cup and they're hosting, which is the third largest tournament outside of Summer Olympics and obviously the Football World Cup. So it's a big one and they'll do a great job of it. But what does that mean post? What does it mean post that 2031? And what are they doing before that to give the national team the best chance of success?
Yeah, very good. Well, we'll see in soon enough time the strategic plan, long-awaited strategic plan from World Rugby.
That's still going.
Is due in January. What are you laughing at, Eddie Jones?
That's still going.
What are you laughing at?
That's going to be the backwards.
It's coming.
That's going to be the backwards strategic plan, is it?
It's the 2027 one. Yeah, that's the one. 2027.
I have it on good authority that it is coming. So anyway, just one quick more question that we'll roll around before we grab just a couple of more issues before you go, boys. I've got to let you go. I think, George, you got a tea time somewhere. Jerry Yanu says on Insta, I feel how rugby should be sold, especially for the younger fans, is try tag to sevens rugby to 15s. I feel what puts people off is the contact, which is heavy in 15s. We also need to raise the profile of sevens in Australia as a genuine pathway to the 15s game and also to bring in new fans and talent and connections to the community. George Gregan, what is your thoughts on the try tag to sevens to 15s?
I think it's probably missing one layer because not everyone can play sevens. There's different shapes and sizes. I think that's the beauty of our game, and it attracts everyone. Sevens doesn't necessarily do that. There's a certain size, shape, and athleticism and movement which is hard, and it's repeat speed. It's different. Whereas if you're playing traditional rugby, or you might integrate like the scrum, the line out, they're bigger shaped people which won't necessarily enjoy or be able to perform at their best in sevens. So I think there's another layer they might add to that, which enables that attraction of all different shapes and sizes, which I don't think sevens does. Yeah, you might get a tall, athletic person, but when they're really young, they're not going to be tall and athletic because they haven't gone through their growth spurt, have they? So I think you want to attract everyone and make it accessible to everyone. So I think I'll put another layer in there rather than just going from tag, which is great. The pass, the running, being able to pass backwards, run forward, learn the game, see where space is. Sevens does that to another level, but then we're missing a piece, I feel.
All right, we'll just leave it there, I think. And thanks again to the third voice for your comments and questions. And please fill out the survey if you do have time, because as I say, it just helps us to improve the program. But just a couple more questions. And the Angus Crichton. Angus Crichton is coming across from rugby league to rugby union. Eddie Jones, when you heard that news, what did you think?
Big bustling 12, mate. Take on the line. The only question is he going to get the preparation to be right for the World Cup? You know, the Super Rugby is a fairly skinny competition now. He's only got that one competition before he goes into the World Cup. I think it'd be ideal if he had another season and went on a European tour. So the question mark, no doubt he's a good enough player, state of origin player, big guy with pace, he's got aggression, he's got enough ball skills to be successful. It's just, is he going to get enough time in the saddle?
George Gregan, is he going to have enough time in the saddle? You had a lot of experience with rugby league converts, Lottie Takiri, Wendell Saylor, Matty Rogers. Is there enough time for Angus Crichton to make an impact at the 2027 World Cup?
Oh, I think the time's the time. They're going to have to make the most. It's going to be sort of like cramming for an exam. Having a little bit of extra time in the saddle would have been ideal. But I actually watched him play the first test at Wembley last year with the Kangaroos. And he plays on the edge, which is like a centre. He has that ability to straighten the line, come back at the ball. He's got really good ball skills, a very good defender, as we know. So that's kind of going to be his position. But I think, and it's been said publicly, they'll learn quickly. They'll back themselves. That's what I love about any of the rugby league players who've played and made the transition across, be it Wendell, Lottie Takiri, Matty Rogers, Peter Ryan. Andrew Walker, they pick it up very quickly and they bring their skill set and their mindset into it, which I think is going to be very good for the Wallabies because he's a winner. And I think, yeah, it's definitely going to be, my take would be midfield just because of those attributes I saw at Wembley.
Very good. And Ewen McKenzie, the final word
well,
for you.
I think he comes from a union background, so he has played the game. A lot of those converts never played the game, so he'll have to draw on his memory banks. But I've seen highlights of him playing as a schoolboy at 12, and so hopefully he'll remember that, and so it'll come back to him, and so it'll be a little less. The instincts will still be there. So. Yeah, ideally you have a long preparation. He hasn't got it, but I think he's motivated. He's certainly forced. He's made the decision and he wants to get on with it, which is commendable. So let's see how we go. I mean, I love a skillful, powerful 12, and assuming that's where he's going to play and not in the back row, it'd be a lot harder for him to play in the back row, I think, just with a subset of skills. So if he has a go at 12, he'll give it every chance based on the fact that he has played the game before.
All right. Well, listen, George Gregan, thank you so much. We will come, people, to our preview of the Six Nations next week. Obviously, an enormous amount of rugby coming up. The Rugby European competition starts. What else have we got going on? We've got Super Rugby Americas. We've got Super Rugby. And then, obviously, the Japanese League continues, as does the Prem, the URC, the European Rugby. So an enormous amount of rugby coming up. But, George, thank you so much for joining us today. I believe you are heading off back to your home in London. It may be tomorrow, so travel safely. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a bit of time with us.
Good on you, Pemby. It's great to catch up with you, Eddie, and obviously Linky.
And you,
Good
Greg.
to see you, mate.
Yeah, indeed.
Good to see you guys.
Right.
Keep warm, mate.
Eddie Jones, thank you. What did you say?
Likewise. Keep warm. Get the layers.
Yeah, indeed. But I'm looking forward to the conversations next week as we build towards the Six Nations, which is, in my opinion, the premier competition in our sport. So certainly looking forward to that. And there's also lots of other information that we'll put in the show notes for you as well about some things that you might want to take a look at. But please, thanks again, everyone, for turning up. Thanks for liking, subscribing, sharing, participating in social media. The third voice, very important for you to continue to participate in the program. And yes, if you do fill that survey in, we do just get to understand a little bit more about you. So it's time to say goodbye to Ewen McKenzie, Eddie Jones and George Gregan. My name is David Pembroke. Please be kind to each other, and it's bye for now.